They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I served mine frozen solid. My name is Karen Sanders, and at 73 years old, I thought I knew everything about family loyalty. I thought I understood the unspoken bonds that tie generations together. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was absolutely right about one thing. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What I'm about to tell you isn't just about Thanksgiving dinner gone wrong. It's about 30 years of being taken for granted, 30 years of opening my wallet while my heart slowly closed, and one November evening that changed everything between my daughter and me forever. Some of you might think I went too far. Others will say I didn't go far enough. But after you hear the whole story, you'll understand why I did what I did, and more importantly, why I wish I hadn't. This is a story about family, money, and the price we pay when we let pride make our decisions for us. It's about the difference between being needed and being loved, and how sometimes we can't tell the difference until it's too late. Most of all, it's about the moment when you realize that the person you thought you knew best in the world is actually a stranger, and the stranger you thought you were talking to is actually yourself. My story begins on a Tuesday morning in November, 3 days before Thanksgiving. I was standing in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd prepared 47 Thanksgiving dinners, watching the morning light filter through curtains that had seen better decades. At 73, I've learned that most of life's important moments don't announce themselves with fanfare. They slip in quietly, wearing the disguise of ordinary days, and by the time you realize their significance, they've already rewritten your story. I remember that morning so clearly because it was the last time I felt truly excited about seeing my family. The anticipation was different that year, sharper somehow, like the edge of a knife that's been honed to perfection. I had been planning this Thanksgiving for weeks, not because I was hosting. That responsibility had shifted to my daughter Claire years ago, but because I was determined to make it perfect. Perfect in a way that would remind everyone why family matters, why traditions matter, why I matter. Claire had called the week before with her usual efficiency. "Mom, we're doing Thanksgiving at Giovanni's this year. Mark made reservations for the private dining room. You know how the kids love their breadsticks." She spoke in that brisk, matter-of-fact tone that had replaced the warmth I remembered from her childhood. Everything was logistics with Claire now. Schedules and arrangements, and the careful choreography of a busy life that somehow always seemed to have room for everything except meaningful conversation. I should have been disappointed about not having the family dinner in someone's home, but I wasn't. I was relieved. Giovanni's was neutral territory, a place where the conversation couldn't veer into the dangerous waters of why I lived alone in a house too big for one person, or why I hadn't made more friends my age, or why I still drove myself everywhere, when Claire clearly thought I shouldn't. At Giovanni's, we could focus on the food and the children's chatter, and the comfortable illusion that we were a close family sharing a special meal. The restaurant choice also meant I could contribute in the way I always did, financially. When Claire mentioned the private dining room, I knew the cost would be substantial. Giovanni's wasn't cheap, and feeding 8 people in their private room on Thanksgiving would easily cost several $100s. I called that afternoon and asked to speak to the manager. "This is Karen Sanders," I said when he came to the phone. "My family has a reservation for Thanksgiving in your private dining room under the name Mark Thompson. I'd like to handle the entire bill, including gratuity." The manager, a kind man named Roberto who remembered me from previous visits, seemed pleased. "Of course, Mrs. Sanders. Should I put this on the card we have on file?" I gave him my platinum card number, the one I'd gotten specifically for family expenses. "And, Roberto, please add a bottle of your best wine to the table, something celebratory." "Certainly. And might I suggest our signature dessert tray? It's quite popular with families." "Perfect. Whatever you think would make the evening special." I hung up, feeling the satisfaction that comes from being useful, from knowing that my contribution would help create a beautiful memory. I didn't tell Claire about the arrangements I'd made. She would find out when the check didn't come, and I imagined her surprise, her gratitude, maybe even her pride in having a mother who could handle such things with grace. The days leading up to Thanksgiving passed in a blur of preparation that had nothing to do with cooking. I spent hours choosing my outfit, a deep burgundy dress that complemented my silver hair, paired with the pearl necklace my late husband Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. I had my hair done at the salon, my nails manicured, and I even bought new shoes, comfortable but elegant pumps that would carry me through the evening without the foot pain that had become my constant companion. I also prepared gifts. This had become my tradition over the years, small tokens of appreciation for each family member. For Claire, I had a beautiful silk scarf from her favorite boutique. For Mark, a bottle of the single malt scotch he mentioned liking. For my granddaughter Emma, who was 15 and increasingly absorbed in her phone, I'd chosen a delicate bracelet with her birthstone. For 12-year-old Jake, a book series he'd been wanting. And for little Sophie, who was 8 and still believed in magic, a music box that played her favorite Disney song. The gifts were wrapped beautifully, each one chosen with care and consideration. I wanted everyone to know how much thought I'd put into their happiness, how much their preferences and personalities mattered to me. These weren't expensive gifts, well, except for the scotch, but they were personal. They were my way of saying, I see you, I know you, I love you. Thanksgiving morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of November day that makes you grateful for the changing seasons. I dressed carefully, taking extra time with my makeup and jewelry. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror that had reflected my image for more than 4 decades, and I felt satisfied with what I saw. I looked like a woman who had something to contribute, someone who belonged at the table. The drive to Giovanni's was pleasant. I had always enjoyed driving, and my car, a reliable sedan that Claire insisted was too big for me, handled beautifully. I arrived exactly on time, 4:30 p.m., just as we'd arranged. The restaurant was bustling with Thanksgiving diners, but the hostess immediately recognized me and led me to the private dining room. The room was lovely, exactly what I'd hoped for. A long table set with crisp white linens, elegant place settings, and fresh flowers in the center. The lighting was warm and intimate, perfect for conversation and connection. I took my seat and waited, feeling the comfortable anticipation that comes before a family gathering. Claire arrived first with Mark and the children. She looked harried, as she always did, her blonde hair slightly disheveled from whatever crisis had nearly made them late. Mark looked tired, but forced a smile when he saw me. The children, bless them, seemed genuinely happy to see their grandmother. Grandma. Sophie launched herself into my arms with the enthusiasm that only 8-year-olds possess. I missed you so much. I missed you too, sweetheart. I held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. You look so grown up. Emma, true to form, offered a distracted, "Hi, Grandma," while texting on her phone. Jake gave me a quick hug and immediately started examining the appetizers that had been set out. Normal teenage behavior, but I remembered when they used to fight for my attention. Claire kissed my cheek, a brief contact that carried the weight of duty rather than affection. You look nice, Mom. Is that a new dress? This old thing? I lied, pleased that she'd noticed. I've had it for years. Mark shook my hand, his grip firm but brief. Good to see you, Karen. Beautiful room they've set up for us. I waited for someone to comment on the flowers, the wine, the obvious care that had been taken with the arrangements. When no one did, I felt a small disappointment, but pushed it aside. The evening was young, and there would be time for appreciation, later. The meal began well enough. The children chattered about school, their friends, their activities. Claire talked about her work at the marketing firm, the demanding clients and impossible deadlines. Mark discussed his recent promotion and the increased travel it would require. I listened and asked questions, playing the role of interested grandmother and mother. But as the evening progressed, I began to notice things. The way Claire checked her phone repeatedly, even during conversation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The way Mark seemed to be calculating something in his head, his attention drifting to some internal concern. The way the children, after the initial excitement of seeing me, gradually turned their attention to their devices or to each other. I tried to insert myself into the conversations, to share updates about my own life, the book club I'd joined, the volunteer work I'd been doing at the local hospital, the garden I was planning for next spring. But my contributions seemed to fall into a void. Eyes would glaze over. Conversations would pause politely before resuming their previous trajectory. The gifts I'd brought were received with appropriate thanks but little enthusiasm. Emma barely looked at the bracelet before setting it aside. Jake flipped through the book but seemed more interested in the dessert menu. Even Sophie, usually my most enthusiastic audience, was distracted by something her older siblings were whispering about. I began to feel like an observer at my own family gathering, present but not participating, included but not involved. The conversations flowed around me like water around a stone, shaped by my presence but not really touching me. The wine I'd selected, a beautiful Pinot Noir that the sommelier had recommended, was praised by Mark. But when I mentioned that I'd chosen it specially for the occasion, the comment seemed to disappear into the general noise of dinner conversation. The dessert tray, elaborate and beautiful, was admired by everyone. But again, my role in arranging it went unacknowledged. As the evening wore on, I found myself working harder and harder to maintain my place in the conversation. I asked more questions, shared more stories, laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't particularly funny. I was performing the role of delighted grandmother, engaged mother, valued family member, but the performance was becoming exhausting. The children grew restless as children do, especially Jake, who was at that age where sitting still for extended periods felt like torture. Emma's texting became more frequent and less discreet. Sophie began to fidget in her chair, asking repeatedly when they could go home. Claire, sensing the shift in energy, began to make those subtle movements that signal the end of a gathering. She gathered her purse, glanced at her watch, made comments about the drive home and early schedules the next day. "This has been lovely, Mom," she said, but her voice carried the tone of someone already mentally elsewhere. The food was delicious, and the room was perfect. I felt a warm surge of pride. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I wanted everything to be special." It was special, Mark agreed, but he was already standing, helping Sophie with her coat. As we prepared to leave, I felt the familiar sadness that comes at the end of family gatherings. The anticipation was over, the togetherness was ending, and I was about to return to my quiet house and my quiet life. But this time, the sadness felt different, deeper somehow. It wasn't just about the evening ending, it was about something that had been missing from the beginning. We gathered in the restaurant's foyer, the children eager to leave, the adults making final pleasantries. The November air was crisp when we stepped outside, carrying the promise of winter and the holidays to come. "Where did you park, Mom?" Claire asked, looking around the crowded lot. "Just over there." I pointed to my car, parked under a streetlight about 50 yards away. "Okay, great. We'll see you soon." Claire gave me another brief kiss, the kind that barely makes contact with your cheek. Mark shook my hand again. "Take care, Karen. Drive safely." The children offered their goodbyes, Sophie giving me another enthusiastic hug, Emma waving while still looking at her phone, Jake already walking toward their car. I watched as they made their way across the parking lot, a little family unit, moving together toward their vehicle. I felt a moment of contentment, despite the evening's minor disappointments. We had shared a meal, we had been together, we had created another memory to add to our family's collection. I was fishing in my purse for my car keys when I heard the sound of their car engine starting. I looked up and waved, expecting to see them pulling past me on their way out of the lot. Instead, I watched in growing disbelief as their car moved toward the exit, past my location, without stopping. At first, I thought they simply hadn't seen me. I raised my hand higher, waving more vigorously. But their car continued past me, past the area where I stood, and turned onto the main road. I stood there in the parking lot, my hand still raised in an unacknowledged wave, watching their taillights disappear into the night. The realization crept over me slowly, like cold water filling a bathtub. They had left without me. My daughter, my son-in-law, my grandchildren, they had simply driven away, leaving me standing alone in a restaurant parking lot on Thanksgiving night. The initial shock gave way to a desperate rationalization. There had been a misunderstanding. They thought I was already in my car. They assumed I was right behind them. This was just a miscommunication that would be resolved with a phone call. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers and dialed Claire's number. It rang several times before going to voicemail. I tried again, and again it went to voicemail. The third time, the call went straight to voicemail without ringing, as if the phone had been turned off. I stood there in the parking lot, holding my phone, my beautiful Thanksgiving outfit suddenly feeling like a costume I'd worn to the wrong party. The restaurant's lights were warm and inviting behind me, but they highlighted the emptiness of the parking lot, the isolation of my situation. Other families were leaving the restaurant, moving past me toward their cars, their voices, carrying the satisfied tones of people who had enjoyed their evening, who were going home together. I watched them and wondered if I looked as abandoned as I felt, if my situation was as obvious to strangers as it was becoming to me. The cold November air began to seep through my coat, and I realized I needed to make a decision. I could stand here hoping they would realize their mistake and return, or I could accept what had happened and find my own way home. I walked to my car on unsteady legs, my elegant shoes clicking against the asphalt with a lonely sound that seemed to echo my footsteps. As I unlocked my car door, I looked back one more time at the restaurant, at the warm light spilling from its windows, at the place where I had spent the evening trying so hard to be included, to be valued, to be remembered. The drive home was the longest 20-minute journey of my life. Every mile gave me more time to think, to process what had happened, to understand the full implications of being forgotten by the people who were supposed to care about me most. When I finally pulled into my driveway, my house looked different somehow. The porch light I'd left on seemed dimmer, the windows more vacant. I sat in my car for several minutes, not quite ready to face the emptiness inside, not quite ready to end this chapter of the evening and begin whatever came next. As I finally walked up the steps to my front door, I could hear my phone ringing inside the house. I hurried to answer it, hoping it would be Claire, calling to apologize, to explain, to come back and get me. But when I answered, the voice on the other end wasn't Claire's. It was Roberto, the restaurant manager. "Mrs. Sanders, I wanted to make sure you got home safely. I noticed you seemed to be having some difficulty in the parking lot." His kindness, from a virtual stranger, hit me harder than I expected. "I'm fine, Roberto. Thank you for asking. I also wanted to let you know that your family seemed to enjoy the evening very much. The arrangements you made were beautiful." "Thank you," I managed, though my voice was starting to crack. "Mrs. Sanders, are you all right?" I looked around, my empty house, at the silence that greeted me, at the life I'd built that suddenly felt hollow and meaningless. "I'm fine, Roberto, just tired." "Well, you have a good evening, and thank you again for choosing Giovanni's for your family celebration." After I hung up, I sat in my living room, still wearing my Thanksgiving dress, still holding my purse, still trying to understand what had happened. The evening had started with such promise, such hope for connection and togetherness. It had ended with me alone, forgotten, abandoned by the very people I'd spent years supporting, helping, and loving. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision that would change everything. If my family could forget about me so easily, if I was so unimportant to them that they could drive away without a second thought, then perhaps it was time for me to forget about some things too. I had spent decades being the reliable one, the one who always helped, who always contributed, who always made things easier for everyone else. I had opened my wallet and my heart, and apparently, only one of those things had been valued. Tomorrow, I decided I would begin to close both. The woman who had woken up that morning excited about Thanksgiving dinner was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who had learned a painful lesson about the difference between being needed and being loved. Someone who was about to teach her own lesson in return. I closed my eyes and began to plan. If Claire's family could drive away from me so easily, I was about to find out how easily they could drive away from the financial security I'd been providing for years. If I didn't matter enough to remember, then perhaps my money didn't matter enough to keep. The last thing I thought before finally falling asleep was how quiet the house was, and how that silence was about to become very expensive for the people who had caused it. The morning after Thanksgiving dawned gray and cold, matching the numbness that had settled over me like a heavy blanket. I woke up still wearing my burgundy dress, now wrinkled and creased from a restless night. My pearls had left indentations on my neck, and my carefully styled hair was matted against the pillow. I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a stranger staring back at me, someone who had been left behind, literally and figuratively. The house felt different in the morning light. Every corner seemed to echo with the silence of abandonment. I made coffee with shaking hands, the simple routine feeling foreign and strange. As I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast for 37 years, I waited for my phone to ring. Surely Claire would call to apologize, to explain, to make things right. The phone remained silent. By 10 o'clock, I couldn't stand the waiting anymore. I dialed Claire's number, my heart hammering against my ribs. It rang once, twice, 3 times before she answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice was casual, distracted, as if nothing had happened. "Claire." I paused, giving her an opportunity to address the elephant in the room. When she didn't, I pressed forward. "I wanted to talk to you about last night." "Oh, last night was lovely. The restaurant was perfect, and the kids had such a good time. Thank you for suggesting Giovanni's." I blinked, stunned. "Claire, you left me at the restaurant." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What do you mean?" "You drove away without me. I was standing in the parking lot, and you just left." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I thought you were right behind us. You said your car was parked nearby, and when we got to our car, I assumed you were getting into yours. I was still standing by the restaurant entrance. I waved at you." "I didn't see you wave. It was dark, and the kids were being impatient. If I had seen you, of course I would have waited." Her explanation was reasonable, logical, even, but it felt hollow, like a script she'd hastily written to cover her tracks. "I called you 3 times, Claire. You didn't answer. My phone died during dinner. I forgot to charge it before we left." She paused again. "Mom, I'm really sorry if there was a misunderstanding. I would never intentionally leave you stranded." The word stranded hung between us like an accusation. That's exactly what I had been, stranded, abandoned, forgotten. But Claire's apology felt perfunctory, like something she was saying because it was expected, not because she felt genuine remorse. "How did you get home?" she asked. and I detected a note of genuine concern in her voice for the first time. "I drove myself, Claire, in my own car, the one you seem to think I shouldn't be driving. I didn't mean—" "Mom, I'm sorry. I really am. It was just a miscommunication." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to accept her explanation and move past this, to return to our normal relationship where I pretended not to notice the distance between us. But something had shifted inside me during that lonely drive home, something that couldn't be shifted back. "I need to go," I said quietly. "Okay. Mom, are you all right?" "I'm fine, Claire, just tired." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. The conversation had done nothing to heal the wound from the night before. If anything, it had made it worse. Claire's explanation might have been plausible, but it revealed something more troubling than malicious intent. It revealed indifference. She hadn't been thinking about me at all. I had been so far from her mind that she hadn't even noticed I wasn't with them. I spent the rest of Friday in a fog, moving through the motions of my daily routine while my mind churned with memories and realizations. I kept thinking about the patterns I'd been ignoring for years, the slow erosion of my place in my daughter's life. When had I become an afterthought? When had my presence become something to be endured rather than enjoyed? The more I thought about it, the more I began to see the signs I'd been missing. The way Claire's calls had become less frequent and more perfunctory over the years. The way family gatherings had become increasingly rushed and obligatory. The way my grandchildren, who had once clamored for my attention, now seemed to view me as a pleasant but peripheral figure in their lives. And always, there was the money, the steady stream of financial support that had become as routine as the sunrise. The mortgage payments I helped with when Mark's business was struggling. The car payments I'd taken over when Claire's marketing firm had laid off half their staff. The private school tuition for Emma, the soccer camp fees for Jake, the dance lessons for Sophie. The emergency fund I'd established for home repairs, medical bills, and all the other crises that seemed to crop up with alarming regularity. I had told myself that this was what families did. They helped each other. They sacrificed for each other. They showed love through actions when words weren't enough. But sitting in my kitchen that Friday morning, I wondered if I had been confusing. Enabling with loving, if I had been buying my place at the family table rather than earning it. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had become the family ATM, reliable and always accessible, but hardly worth a second thought. My value to my daughter's family was measured in dollars and cents, not in the wisdom of my years or the depth of my love. I was useful, but I wasn't cherished. Saturday morning brought no relief from these dark thoughts. I woke up feeling hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out of me during the night. I made coffee and toast, but everything tasted like cardboard. I tried to read, but the words blurred together on the page. I attempted to watch television, but the cheerful voices of the morning show hosts seemed to mock my isolation. By noon, I had made a decision. If my family valued my financial support more than my presence, then perhaps it was time to see how they managed without both. I drove to the bank, my hands steady on the steering wheel for the first time in days. The familiar route through town took on a different quality, as if I were seeing everything through new eyes. The houses looked smaller, the streets narrower, the whole world somehow diminished by my new understanding of my place in it. At the bank, I requested to speak with my financial advisor, Margaret Chen, who had been managing my accounts for the past 15 years. Margaret was a kind woman in her 50s who had always treated me with respect and genuine warmth. She greeted me with her usual smile, but I could see concern creep into her eyes as she took in my appearance. "Mrs. Sanders, how lovely to see you. How was your Thanksgiving?" "Educational," I replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly at my tone, but she maintained her professional demeanor. "What can I help you with today?" I need to make some changes to my accounts. Specifically, I want to cancel all automatic payments and transfers to my daughter's family. Margaret's expression became carefully neutral. Of course. May I ask if this is temporary or permanent? Permanent. Oh, she pulled up my accounts on her computer, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Let me see what we're working with here. You have automatic transfers set up for quite a few accounts, actually. As she read through the list, I was surprised by the sheer number of financial commitments I had made over the years. There was the monthly mortgage assistance, $2,800 that I transferred to Claire's account every month to help with their house payment. The car payment for Mark's truck, $485 monthly. The credit card that I paid off every month, the one Claire used for groceries and household expenses, typically $800 to $1,200 monthly. Then there were the children's expenses, Emma's private school tuition, $500 monthly, Jake's travel soccer team fees, $300 monthly, Sophie's dance lessons, piano lessons, and art classes, $450 monthly. The college savings accounts I contributed to for all 3 grandchildren, $500 monthly for each child. Good heavens, Margaret said softly. Mrs. Sanders, this totals nearly $9,000 monthly. That's over $100,000 annually. The number hit me like a slap. I had known I was helping significantly, but I hadn't realized the full scope of my financial support. Over $100,000 a year, more than many people's entire salaries. I want all of it stopped, I said firmly. Every automatic payment, every transfer, every recurring transaction. I want my money to stay in my accounts. Margaret's professional composure slipped slightly. Mrs. Sanders, forgive me for asking, but are you sure about this? Some of these payments have been in place for several years. Your family is likely depending on this support for their monthly budget. I'm counting on it, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. Margaret studied my face for a long moment. Would you like me to set up a meeting with you and your daughter to discuss this transition? Sometimes families benefit from having a neutral third party help navigate financial changes. No, I want the changes made immediately. Today, if possible. Margaret nodded slowly. I can process most of these changes today, but some may take a few days to fully take effect. The automatic transfers will be stopped immediately, but some of the credit card authorizations may need to be handled directly with the card companies. Whatever needs to be done, please do it. As Margaret worked on her computer, I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread. Relief that I was finally taking control of my financial resources, that I was no longer allowing myself to be taken for granted. Dread about what would happen when Claire discovered that the money she'd come to depend on was no longer flowing into her accounts. Mrs. Sanders, Margaret said carefully, I have to ask, is everything all right? In all the years I've known you, I've never seen you make such drastic financial changes. I looked at this woman who had helped me manage my money for so many years, who had watched me systematically funnel my retirement savings into my daughter's life, who had never once questioned my choices even when they might not have been, in my best interest. Everything is exactly as it should be, I said finally. For the first time in years, everything is exactly as it should be. Margaret printed out a summary of all the changes we'd made, a document that represented the end of my role as the family financier. As I looked at the list, I felt a moment of panic. Was I being too harsh? Was I punishing my entire family for what might have been an innocent mistake? But then I remembered standing in that parking lot, watching their car disappear into the night, and my resolve hardened. They had shown me exactly how much I mattered to them. Now I was going to show them exactly how much they had mattered to me. The weekend passed in a strange state of suspended animation. I knew that bills would start arriving soon, that automatic payments would be declined, that Claire's carefully balanced budget would begin to crumble. But I also knew that it would take time for the full impact to be felt. Claire might not even notice for a week or two, assuming she didn't check her accounts regularly. I spent Saturday and Sunday in a peculiar state of calm, as if I were watching a play unfold from the audience rather than participating in it. I cleaned my house thoroughly, organized my closets, and prepared my space as if I were expecting guests. In a way, I suppose I was. I was expecting the explosion that would come when Claire discovered what I had done. Monday morning brought the first sign that my actions were having an effect. My phone rang at 8:30 a.m., and Claire's name appeared on the caller ID. I let it ring 5 times before answering, just as she had done to me on Thanksgiving night. "Good morning, Claire." "Mom, I'm getting weird notifications from the bank. It says some of my automatic payments were declined. I think there might be a problem with the account you set up for us." I had been rehearsing this conversation in my mind all weekend, but hearing Claire's voice made my heart race. "What kind of problem?" "I don't know. The mortgage payment bounced, and so did Mark's truck payment. I tried to call the bank, but they said they couldn't discuss it with me since I'm not the account holder." I took a deep breath. "The payments didn't bounce, Claire. I stopped them." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You stopped them? What do you mean?" "I mean, I went to the bank and canceled all the automatic payments and transfers I had set up for your family. The money is staying in my accounts now." "I don't understand. Why would you do that?" "Because I realized that I was confusing being needed with being valued, and I decided I didn't want to be needed anymore." "Mom, this doesn't make sense. Are you upset about something?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. "Am I upset? Claire, you left me at a restaurant? On Thanksgiving night? You drove away without me and didn't even realize I was missing." "I told you. That was a misunderstanding. I thought you were right behind us. And I told you that I waved at you, that I called you 3 times, that I was clearly visible, in the parking lot. But you know what? It doesn't matter whether it was intentional or not. What matters is that I stood there and realized how little I actually matter to any of you." "That's not true, Mom. You matter to us, your family." "Am I? Because from where I stand, it looks like I'm a bank account with a pulse." "When was the last time you called me just to talk, Claire? When was the last time you asked about my life, my health, my feelings? When was the last time you spent time with me that didn't involve me paying for something?" Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I don't want you to say anything. I want you to figure out how to pay your own bills. Mom, we can't afford the mortgage without your help. You know that. Mark's business is still recovering from the recession, and my salary barely covers the other expenses." "Then perhaps you should have thought about that before you bought a house you couldn't afford." "We bought that house because you said you wanted to help us. You said you wanted your grandchildren to have a nice place to grow up." She was right, of course. I had encouraged them to buy the larger house, had promised to help with the payments. But that was before I understood the true cost of my generosity, not just the money, but the loss of my dignity, my value as a person rather than a resource. Things change, Claire. People change. I've changed. What about the kids? Emma's tuition is due next month. Jake has a tournament coming up that we've already paid for. Sophie's recital is in 2 weeks, and she's been practicing for months. Each mention of my grandchildren was like a small knife to my heart. I loved those children deeply, and the thought of them being disappointed or disadvantaged because of my actions made me feel sick. But I also knew that if I backed down now, nothing would change. I would go back to being the reliable source of funding, and my family would go back to taking me for granted. "You'll figure it out, Claire. You're a smart woman with a good job. I'm sure you'll find a way to manage. I can't believe you're doing this over a simple misunderstanding." "This isn't about Thanksgiving night, Claire. That was just the moment when I realized what our relationship had become. This is about years of being treated like a wallet instead of a person. That's not fair. We appreciate everything you do for us. Do you? When was the last time you thanked me for the mortgage payments? When was the last time you acknowledged how much I contribute to your family's life? When was the last time you acted like my help was a gift rather than an obligation? Claire was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. I don't know what you want from me, Mom. I want you to want me, not just my money. I want to be included in your life because you enjoy my company, not because you need my financial support. I want to matter to you as a person. You do matter. To us. Prove it. How? Figure out how to have a relationship with me that doesn't involve my bank account. Call me because you want to talk to me, not because you need something. Include me in your plans because you value my presence, not because I'm paying for the dinner. And if we can't? What if we lose the house? What if we have to take the kids out of their schools? What if we have to move somewhere cheaper? Then you'll do what millions of other families do. You'll adjust. You'll make sacrifices. You'll learn to live within your means. And maybe, just maybe, you'll learn to appreciate what you have instead of constantly reaching for what you think you need. I can't believe you're willing to hurt the kids to make a point. I'm not hurting the kids, Claire. I'm teaching them that money comes with responsibilities, that support comes with appreciation, and that love cannot be bought. This is cruel, Mom. Cruel. You want to know what's cruel? Being forgotten on Thanksgiving night. Being treated like an ATM. For years. Being valued only for what I can provide, not for who I am. I'm sorry about Thanksgiving. I'm sorry if you felt forgotten, but this isn't the way to handle it. It's the only way I know how to handle it. You've shown me that my presence is optional, Claire. Now I'm showing you that my financial support is optional too. Please, Mom. Please don't do this. We need your help. And I need to be treated like a human being instead of a financial institution. But it seems we can't always get what we need. What do you want? Do you want us to beg? I want you to want me in your life for reasons that have nothing to do with money. I want you to call me because you miss me, not because you need me. I want you to include me because you love me, not because I'm useful to you. I do love you, Mom. Then show me. Show me in a way that doesn't involve my checkbook. I hung up the phone before she could respond, my hands shaking from the adrenaline of the confrontation. I had said things I'd been thinking for years, things I'd never had the courage to voice before. It felt both liberating and terrifying. Over the next few days, my phone rang constantly. Claire called at least twice a day, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always desperate. Mark called once, his voice tight with controlled panic as he tried to negotiate some kind of compromise. Even Emma called, her teenage voice quavering as she asked if I was really going to make them move. I answered some of the calls and ignored others. When I did answer, I remained firm in my position. The financial support was over. If they wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be based on something other than money. The calls from Claire became increasingly frantic as the reality of their situation sank in. Without my monthly contributions, their budget was not just tight, it was impossible. They had built their entire lifestyle around my financial support, and now they were facing the collapse of everything they had taken for granted. The bank called about the mortgage, Claire said during one particularly difficult conversation. We're behind on the payment and they want to know when we can catch up. I imagine they do. Mom, please, I'm begging you. We'll lose the house. Then you'll find somewhere else to live. The kids will have to change schools. Emma will have to leave all her friends. Children are resilient, Claire. They'll adapt. How can you be so cold about this? I'm not being cold. I'm being realistic. You've been living beyond your means for years, and I've been enabling that. Now, You have to face reality. This is our life, Mom. Our home. Our children's future. And it's my money, Claire. My life savings. My security. Funny how that works. By the end of the second week, I could tell that the full scope of the financial disaster was becoming clear to Claire's family. Mark's truck was repossessed, which meant he had to borrow Claire's car to get to work. Emma's school called about the overdue tuition, and they were threatening to suspend her enrollment. The credit card I had been paying off was maxed out and declined when Claire tried to buy groceries. During this time, I maintained my routine as much as possible. I went to my book club, where I sat quietly and listened to the discussion of the month's selection. I volunteered at the hospital, wheeling patients to their appointments and offering comfort to anxious families. I tended to my small garden, preparing it for winter. But underneath the normalcy, I was struggling with my own emotions. The satisfaction I had expected to feel was mixed with guilt and sadness. I loved my grandchildren, and knowing they were being affected by my actions made me feel sick, but I also knew that if I gave in now, nothing would change. Claire would promise to do better, to include me more, to appreciate me more, but eventually things would slip back to the old patterns. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after my confrontation with Claire. I was in my kitchen, making soup for my lunch when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Claire's car, but she wasn't alone. All 3 of my grandchildren were with her. My heart leaped at the sight of them, but I also felt a spike of anger. Claire was using the children as emotional weapons, bringing them to manipulate me into backing down. I watched as they walked up my front steps, Sophie holding Claire's hand, Jake and Emma trailing behind with expressions of confusion and worry. The doorbell rang, and I stood in my kitchen for a long moment, debating whether to answer it. Finally, I walked to the front door and opened it, bracing myself for whatever was coming. "Hello, Mom," Claire said quietly. Her face was pale and drawn, and I could see that she'd been crying recently. The children stood behind her, looking uncertain and uncomfortable. "Hello, Claire. Children. Can we come in?" I stepped aside and let them enter. Sophie immediately ran to me and hugged my legs, her small arms wrapping around me with desperate affection. "Grandma, I missed you so much." "I missed you too, sweetheart," I said, stroking her hair and fighting back tears. Jake gave me a hesitant hug, while Emma stood back, her arms crossed, looking sullen and angry. "We need to talk," Claire said. "About what?" "About this situation. About the money. About our family." I led them into the living room, the same room where I had spent so many evenings alone, thinking about the choices I had made. The children sat on the couch, Sophie snuggling close to me, while Claire took the chair across from us. "The kids wanted to see you," Claire said. "They don't understand why you're doing this." I looked at my grandchildren, these beautiful young people who had been such a source of joy in my life. Sophie's eyes were bright with innocence, Jake looked confused and worried, and Emma was clearly angry about something she didn't fully understand. "I wanted to see them too," I said honestly. "Then why won't you help us anymore?" Sophie asked, her voice small and confused. "Mommy says we might have to move away." My heart broke a little more. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. "Sweetheart, sometimes relationships need to change." "But why?" Jake asked. "What did we do wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong," I assured him. "This is between your mother and me." Emma finally spoke up, her voice sharp with teenage indignation. "You're being mean to us because you're mad at Mom." "I'm not being mean, Emma. I'm making a choice about how I spend my money." "It's the same thing," she shot back. "You're punishing us." I looked at Claire, who was watching this exchange with tears in her eyes. "Is this what you told them? That I'm punishing them?" "I told them that you're upset about something and that you've decided to stop helping us financially." I told them that we might have to make some changes. What kind of changes? Sophie asked, her voice getting smaller. Claire took a deep breath. We might have to move to a smaller house. You might have to go to a different school. We might not be able to do some of the activities you're used to. The children absorbed this information with the resilience of youth, but I could see the fear and uncertainty in their faces. They were worried about their stability, their future, their world changing in ways they couldn't control. I don't want to move, Sophie said quietly. I like my room. I don't want to change schools, Jake added. All my friends are at my school. This is stupid, Emma said, her anger finally boiling over. Grandma, why are you doing this? Why are you being so mean? I looked at this angry, confused teenager, and I saw myself at her age, passionate, certain, unable to understand the complicated motivations of adults. I'm not being mean, Emma. I'm trying to teach your mother something important. What? That relationships need to be built on more than money. That family means more than financial support. That love cannot be bought or sold. But you're hurting us to teach her, Emma said, her voice breaking. That's not fair. She was right. Of course, it wasn't fair. The children were caught in the middle of a conflict they hadn't created and couldn't resolve. But I also knew that if I gave in now, the lesson would be lost, and we would all go back to the old patterns that had brought us to this point. Sometimes life isn't fair, Emma. Sometimes people have to face consequences for choices they didn't make directly, but that they benefited from. Your family has been living beyond its means for years, and I've been enabling that. Now, you're all learning what it means to live within your actual income. But we didn't know, Jake said. We didn't know you were paying for so much stuff. I looked at Claire, who was staring at her hands. No, you didn't know. And whose fault is that? Mom, please, Claire said quietly. Don't do this in front of the kids. Do what? Tell them the truth? Tell them that I've been paying for their house, their car, their school, their activities, their food, their clothes, their everything? Tell them that I've been funding their lifestyle for years while being treated like an afterthought? You're scaring them. I'm educating them. There's a difference. Sophie looked up at me with wide eyes. Grandma, are you poor now? No, sweetheart, I'm not poor. I have plenty of money. I just decided to stop giving it to your parents. Why? Because they forgot that I'm a person, not just a bank account. Because they forgot to appreciate what I was doing for them. Because they forgot to include me in their lives in ways that didn't involve money. We didn't forget you, Sophie said, her voice earnest. We love you. I love you too, sweetheart. All of you. That's not the problem. Then what is the problem? Jake asked. I looked at my grandson, this thoughtful 12-year-old who was trying to understand a situation that was complicated even for adults. The problem is that your parents only wanted me around when they needed something from me. They forgot that I'm a person with feelings, not just someone who pays bills. That's not true, Claire said sharply. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk, Claire? When was the last time you invited me to do something that didn't involve me paying for it? When was the last time you asked about my life, my interests, my feelings? Claire was quiet, and I could see her thinking, trying to remember instances that would contradict my accusations. The silence stretched on, and I knew she was coming up empty. I've been busy, she said finally. Work has been demanding, and the kids have so many activities. I've been meaning to call more often. For years, Claire. You've been meaning to call more often for years? I don't know what you want from me. I want you to want me in your life for reasons that have nothing to do with money. I want you to value my presence, not just my presence. I want you to remember that I'm your mother, not your personal financial institution. Emma stood up abruptly, her face flushed with anger and tears. This is all stupid. You're both being stupid. I hate this whole thing." She stormed out of the room, and I heard the front door slam a moment later. Jake looked uncomfortable and confused, while Sophie pressed closer to me as if trying to comfort me. "I should go after her," Claire said, but she made no move to get up. "Let her go. She needs to process this in her own way." She's right. Though, this is stupid. We're a family, Mom. Families don't treat each other this way. Families don't take each other for granted either. Families don't abandon each other in parking lots. Families don't ignore each other for months at a time. I didn't abandon you. I made a mistake. And I made a mistake too. I enabled your family to live beyond your means, and I taught you that my love could be measured in dollars and cents. Now, we're both paying for our mistakes. Sophie looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Are you not going to be our grandma anymore?" "Oh, sweetheart," I said, pulling her close. "I'll always be your grandma. Nothing can change that." "But we won't see you anymore." "You can see me anytime you want, but it will have to be because you want to see me, not because your parents need something from me." Jake frowned. "I don't understand the difference." "The difference is that before, your parents would bring you to see me when they needed money or help with something. Now, if you want to see me, it will be because you miss me and want to spend time with me." I do miss you," Sophie said. "I miss you all the time." "I miss you too, sweetheart. More than you know." Claire stood up slowly, her shoulders sagging with defeat. "I need to find Emma and get them home. We have a lot to figure out." "Yes, you do. Mom, is there any possibility that we could work something out? Maybe not full support, but some help while we transition?" I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised and loved and supported for 42 years, and I felt a moment of wavering. It would be so easy to say yes, to offer a compromise that would ease their transition and preserve our relationship. But I also knew that any compromise would eventually become the new status quo, and nothing would really change. "No, Claire, I'm done being your financial safety net. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be built on something other than money. I don't know how to do that." "Then you'll learn, just like you'll learn how to live within your means." Claire gathered her purse and called for the children. Sophie hugged me tightly before leaving, and Jake gave me another, uncertain hug. Emma had already gone to the car and was sitting in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. "I love you, Mom," Claire said quietly. "I hope you know that." "I love you too, Claire. But love isn't just words. It's actions. It's consideration. It's remembering that the people you love are more than what they can do for you." After they left, I sat in my living room feeling empty and sad. The confrontation had been necessary, but it had also been painful. Seeing my grandchildren's confusion and fear had been harder than I expected, but I also knew that this was the only way to force a real change in our relationship. That evening, I called Margaret at the bank to check on my accounts. The money that had been flowing out of my accounts for years was now accumulating, and I was surprised by how much my balance had grown in just 3 weeks. "Mrs. Sanders, your accounts are looking very healthy," Margaret said. "Is there anything specific you'd like to do with the additional funds?" "Not yet," I said. "I'm still figuring out what comes next. If you don't mind me asking, how are things going with your family?" "They're going exactly as I expected them to. Badly, but necessarily. I hope things work out for everyone." "So do I, Margaret. So do I." As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in years, I was thinking about my own future rather than my family's present needs. I had money to travel, to pursue hobbies, to create a life that was about more than being useful to other people. It was a strange feeling, both liberating and lonely. But loneliness, I was learning, was better than being taken for granted. And, Sometimes, you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. The weeks that followed my decision felt like watching a slow-motion catastrophe unfold. I had expected the financial pressures to mount gradually, but I hadn't anticipated how quickly Claire's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble. It was like pulling a single thread and watching an entire tapestry unravel before my eyes. The first real crisis came exactly 4 weeks after I had stopped the payments. Claire called me on a Wednesday morning, and I could hear the panic in her voice before she even said hello. "Mom, they're foreclosing on the house." I was sitting in my breakfast nook, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy in my own life. "How soon?" 60 days. They filed the papers yesterday. Mark got served at work." Her voice cracked. Everyone in his office saw it happen. He was humiliated. I felt a pang of sympathy for my son-in-law, who had always been proud of his ability to provide for his family. Mark was a good man who had gotten in over his head, but that didn't change the reality of their situation. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know. We've been looking at apartments, but everything decent is so expensive, and with Mark's truck being repossessed, we're down to 1 car. I don't know how we're going to manage school pickups and work schedules with just my car." I listened to her catalog of problems, each one a direct result of the financial support I had withdrawn. Part of me wanted to step in, to fix everything as I had always done. But a larger part of me recognized that these were the natural consequences of living beyond their means, consequences that had been delayed but not eliminated by my years of financial assistance. "Have you talked to the bank about a loan modification?" "They want to see 3 months of stable income at our actual earning level. Without your help, we don't qualify for anything that would make the payments manageable." "What about Mark's business? You said it was recovering." Claire laughed bitterly. "It was recovering because we weren't stressed about money. Now that we're facing homelessness, Mark's barely sleeping. He's making mistakes, losing clients. Yesterday he forgot about a consultation he'd scheduled, and the potential client hired someone else. I could picture the downward spiral clearly. Financial stress affecting work performance, which led to reduced income, which created more financial stress. It was a vicious cycle that I knew could destroy families. "The kids are starting to ask questions we can't answer," Claire continued. "Sophie asked me yesterday if we were going to be homeless. Jake overheard me crying on the phone with the mortgage company, and now he thinks it's his fault somehow. And Emma. Emma isn't speaking to any of us. She's furious about everything. Each detail felt like a small knife to my heart. I loved those children deeply, and knowing they were suffering because of my actions was almost unbearable. But I also knew that they were learning important lessons about money, responsibility, and the consequences of choices. Lessons that might serve them well in the future, even if they were painful in the present. "Mom, please," Claire said, her voice breaking completely. "I'm begging you. I'll do whatever you want. I'll call you every day. I'll visit more often. I'll include you in everything. Just please help us save the house." "What you're offering isn't what I want, Claire." "Then what do you want? Tell me, and I'll do it." "I want you to want those things. I want you to call me because you miss talking to me, not because you're obligated to. I want you to include me because you value my company, not because it's part of a deal we made. I do miss talking to you. I do value your company. Do you? Or do you miss having access to my bank account?" The silence on the other end of the line was telling. I could almost hear Claire trying to formulate an answer that would satisfy both of us. But we both knew the truth. Our relationship had become so intertwined with financial dependency that neither of us knew what it would look like without money as the foundation. "I don't know how to prove that to you," Claire said finally. "I don't know either. But I know that giving you money now won't prove anything except that I'm still willing to be manipulated." "You think I'm manipulating you?" I think you're desperate, and desperate people say whatever they think the other person wants to hear. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling the weight of my decision more heavily than ever before. I had thought that cutting off the financial support would be difficult but straightforward. I hadn't anticipated the emotional toll of watching my family's life fall apart piece by piece. Over the next few days, the calls became more frequent and more desperate. Mark called once, his pride clearly shattered, asking if there was any way I could help them just until he got back on his feet. I told him the same thing I had told Claire. The financial support was over, permanently. Karen, I need you to understand something, Mark said, his voice tight with controlled emotion. I never wanted to depend on your money. I always intended to pay you back once the business was stable. I know you did, Mark. You're a good man, and this isn't about your character. Then what is it about? It's about the fact that your wife forgot I existed until she needed my money. It's about the fact that my grandchildren only see me when their parents bring them by on their way to ask for something. It's about the fact that I've become invisible as a person and visible only as a financial resource. That's not true. The kids love you. I know they do. But love isn't the same as attention, and attention isn't the same as consideration. When was the last time any of you made an effort to understand my life, my interests, my needs? Mark was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. I guess we've all been so caught up in our own problems that we haven't been paying attention to anything else. That's exactly my point. You've been taking my help for granted for so long that it never occurred to any of you to wonder how I felt about being needed only when you had problems. So what happens now? We lose everything because you want more attention? His words stung because they contained just enough truth to hurt. You lose some things, Mark. You don't lose everything. You lose the house you couldn't afford, the lifestyle you couldn't maintain, the illusion that someone else will always bail you out of financial trouble. But you still have each other. You still have your health. You still have opportunities to rebuild. And what do you have, Karen? What do you gain from destroying your family's stability? I gain the knowledge that any relationship I have with you going forward will be genuine. I gain the certainty that when you call me, it's because you want to talk to me, not because you need something from me. I gain the possibility of being valued for who I am rather than what I can provide. And if we can't rebuild? What if losing the house destroys us financially for years? What if the kids never forgive you for this? Then I'll live with the consequences of my choices, just like you're going to have to live with the consequences of yours. The conversation ended awkwardly, with neither of us satisfied but both of us understanding where the other stood. I felt bad for Mark, who was a decent man caught in circumstances that were largely beyond his control. But I also knew that someone had to be the adult in this situation. Someone had to insist on facing reality. 2 days later, Emma called me directly. I was surprised to hear her voice on the phone. She rarely called anyone, preferring to text or communicate through social media. "Grandma, this is stupid," she said without preamble. "You're destroying our family because you're mad at Mom." "Hello, Emma. How are you doing?" "I'm terrible. We might have to move in with Aunt Sarah, and she lives in a different school district. I'll have to leave all my friends, leave my school, leave everything I care about. And for what? Because you want Mom to call you more often?" I could hear the pain in her 15-year-old voice, and it broke my heart. Emma was at an age where stability and friendships were everything, and I was threatening to take both away from her. "It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." "No, it's not. You have money, we need money, and you're saying no because your feelings are hurt. That's not complicated. That's just mean." "Emma, do you know how much money I've been giving your family?" "I don't care how much. You have enough, and we need help. I've been giving your parents over $100,000 a year. That's more than most people make in their entire jobs." There was silence on the other end of the line. "That's not possible." "It's completely possible. I've been paying for your house, your cars, your school, your activities, your food, your clothes, your everything. Your family has been living on my retirement savings for years. I didn't know that. Of course you didn't, because your parents never told you where the money was coming from. They let you believe that they could afford the life you were living, and they let me believe that my help was appreciated. But you're my grandmother. Isn't that what grandparents do? Help their families? Some grandparents help when they can, but most grandparents aren't expected to fund their children's entire lifestyle. Most grandparents are appreciated for what they give, not taken for granted. I do appreciate you, Grandma. Do you? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked me about my life, my day, my feelings? When was the last time you spent time with me when your parents weren't asking me for money? Emma was quiet, and I could almost hear her thinking. I don't know, she said. Finally. I guess I never thought about it. That's exactly the problem. None of you ever thought about it. I became invisible except when you needed something. But we're family. We're supposed to help each other. Help goes both ways. Emma, it's not just one person giving everything while everyone else takes. It's mutual support, mutual consideration, mutual respect. I don't understand what you want from us. I want you to want me in your life for reasons that have nothing to do with money. I want you to call me because you miss me, not because your mom told you to butter me up before asking for something. I want you to be interested in my life, not just interested in what I can do for yours. And because we didn't do that, you're willing to let us lose our house? Emma, your family has been living in a house they couldn't afford, funded by my money. That's not sustainable, and it's not healthy. At some point, everyone has to live within their means. But we didn't know. If we had known how much you were spending, maybe we would have been more grateful. Maybe. But you shouldn't need to know the dollar amount to be grateful. You should be grateful because someone who loves you is helping you, regardless of how much that help costs. I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm sorry we weren't more grateful. I'm sorry we didn't call you enough or visit you enough. But please don't punish us for something we didn't even realize we were doing wrong. Emma's apology felt genuine, and it made me want to cry. She was trying to understand, trying to bridge the gap between us, but she was also still thinking like a child who believed that an apology could undo the consequences of years of neglect. I'm not punishing you, sweetheart. I'm trying to teach your family a lesson that should have been learned a long time ago. I'm trying to show you that relationships can't be built on money, that love can't be bought, and that everyone deserves to be valued for who they are, not just what they can provide. But what if we can't learn the lesson fast enough? What if we lose everything while we're trying to figure it out? Then you'll rebuild. People do it every day. You'll find a smaller place to live, your parents will adjust their expectations, and you'll all learn to appreciate what you have instead of constantly reaching for what you think you need. I don't want to move. I don't want to change schools. I don't want my whole life to fall apart. I know, sweetheart. Change is hard, especially when you're young. But sometimes change is necessary, even when it's difficult. I hate this. I hate all of it. I know you do, and I'm sorry that you're caught in the middle of something that's really between your mother and me. Then why don't you just work it out with her? Why does it have to affect all of us? Because all of you were part of the problem, Emma. Not intentionally, but you were all living a lifestyle that depended on my money while treating me like I didn't matter. The only way to fix that is to remove the money from the equation and see what kind of relationship we can build without it. And what if we can't build any relationship? What if this destroys our family forever? Then at least it will be an honest destruction. At least we'll know the truth about what our family was really based on. Emma hung up without saying goodbye, and I sat staring at the phone for a long time afterward. Her call had been the most difficult yet, because it came from a place of genuine confusion and pain rather than manipulation or desperation. She really didn't understand what was happening, and she really was suffering because of decisions that adults had made. But I also knew that Emma was learning important lessons about money, about relationships, and about the consequences of taking people for granted. These were lessons that would serve her well in adulthood, even if they were painful to learn at 15. The crisis deepened over the following week. Claire called to tell me that they had found an apartment they could afford, but it was in a different school district and significantly smaller than what they were used to. The children would have to share bedrooms, and there would be no yard, no garage, no space for the life they had built. "Jake is devastated about leaving his soccer team," Claire said during one of our increasingly brief conversations. "Emma is furious about changing schools in the middle of her sophomore year. And Sophie keeps asking why we have to move when Grandma has plenty of money to help us stay." "What do you tell her?" "I tell her that sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. I try not to make you the villain in this, Mom, but it's getting harder every day." "I appreciate that. Do you? Because I'm starting to wonder if you appreciate anything about how hard this is for all of us." "I know it's hard, Claire. I never thought it would be easy." "Then why are you doing it? What's the point of all this suffering?" "The point is that suffering teaches lessons that comfort never can. The point is that your family needed to learn what it felt like to live within your actual means. The point is that you needed to understand the true cost of taking people for granted." "We've learned, Mom. We've definitely learned. Can't that be enough?" "Have you learned? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear so that I'll turn the money back on?" "I don't know how to answer that question in a way that will satisfy you." "That's exactly the problem, Claire. You're still thinking about this as a negotiation, as something you can say or do to get what you want. You're not thinking about it as a fundamental change in how we relate to each other. Because I don't know how to make that fundamental change happen. I don't know how to prove to you that I want you in my life for reasons beyond money. Maybe you can't prove it. Maybe you have to live it, day by day, choice by choice, until both of us believe it's real. And in the meantime, my children suffer? In the meantime, your children learn that their grandmother isn't an ATM, that their lifestyle was built on someone else's sacrifice, and that real relationships require mutual care and consideration. The conversation ended as they all did now, with both of us frustrated and neither of us satisfied. But I was beginning to see signs that the lesson was sinking in, at least partially. Claire's tone was changing, becoming less demanding and more reflective. She was starting to ask questions about my perspective, rather than simply arguing for her own. The real test came when Mark's business partner called me directly. Tom Richards had been Mark's partner for 8 years, and I had met him several times at family gatherings. He was calling, he said, out of concern for Mark's welfare. "Karen, I hope you don't mind me reaching out, but Mark is falling apart. He's distracted, he's making mistakes, and he's talking about giving up the business altogether." "I'm sorry to hear that, Tom. Look, I don't know what's going on between you and your family, and it's not really my business. But Mark is a good guy, and he's a good partner. This business has taken us 8 years to build, and I'd hate to see it destroyed because of some family conflict." "The business isn't being destroyed because of family conflict, Tom. It's struggling because Mark is learning what it feels like to live without a financial safety net. But that safety net was helping him be successful. Without the stress of worrying about basic expenses, he could focus on growing the business. Now he's so worried about keeping a roof over his family's head that he can't think about anything else." Tom's observation was astute, and it highlighted one of the unintended consequences of my decision. By removing the financial support, I had created stress that was affecting Mark's ability to earn income, which made their situation even worse. "That's unfortunate," I said, "but it's also reality. Most business owners have to worry about both, their business success and their personal expenses. Mark just got used to having someone else handle one of those worries. Karen, with all due respect, this seems like cutting off your nose to spite your face. If Mark's business fails, he'll be in an even worse position to support his family. And if I keep bailing them out every time things get difficult, they'll never learn to manage their finances responsibly. But there has to be a middle ground. Some way to help them transition without destroying everything they've built. Tom, what they built was constructed on a foundation of my money. It was never as solid as it appeared to be. So you're willing to let it all collapse? I'm willing to let them face the natural consequences of their choices. If that means the business struggles, if that means they have to downsize their lifestyle, if that means they have to work harder and worry more, then that's what reality looks like for most people. And what about the kids? They didn't make these choices. No, they didn't. But they benefited from these choices, and now they're learning what those benefits actually cost. They're learning that money doesn't appear magically, that lifestyles have to be earned, and that taking people for granted has consequences. Tom sighed heavily. I hope you know what you're doing, Karen. I really do. So do I, Tom. So do I. After Tom's call, I began to question my resolve more seriously than I had since the beginning. The ripple effects of my decision were spreading far beyond my immediate family. Mark's business was suffering, which affected Tom and his family as well. The children were being forced to leave their schools and their friends. Claire was under more stress than I had ever seen her, and it was affecting her work performance too. But I also knew that all of these problems had existed before, hidden beneath the comfortable cushion of my financial support. Mark's business had been artificially stable because he didn't have to worry about personal expenses. The children's lifestyle had been artificially elevated because someone else was paying for it. Claire had been artificially secure because she knew that any financial crisis could be solved with a phone call to her mother. None of it had been real. None of it had been sustainable. I had been enabling a house of cards to remain standing, and eventually, the wind was going to blow. Anyway, the hardest call came from Sophie, my youngest grandchild, whose 8-year-old voice was small and confused when she called me one evening. Grandma, are you mad at me? No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you at all. Then why can't we live in our house anymore? Because your parents can't afford the house without my help, and I decided to stop helping them. But why did you decide that? How do you explain adult relationship dynamics to an 8-year-old? How do you make a child understand concepts like being taken for granted, or financial codependency, or the difference between being needed and being valued? Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, Sophie. Your parents made some mistakes about money, and I made some mistakes about helping them. Now we're all trying to fix those mistakes. Are we poor now? You're not poor, sweetheart. You just can't afford to live in as big a house as you're used to. Will we be okay? You'll be okay. It might be different from what you're used to, but you'll be okay. I miss you, Grandma. I miss you too, sweetheart. More than you know. Can I still see you even if we move? Of course you can. Anytime you want. But Mommy says we might move far away. Not that far away. And even if you move, I'll still be your grandmother, and you'll still be my granddaughter. Promise? I promise, Sophie. That will never change. After Sophie hung up, I cried for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Not the angry tears of betrayal, or the frustrated tears of being taken for granted, but the deep, wrenching tears of a grandmother who loved her grandchildren more than her own comfort, and was watching them suffer because of choices she had made. But even through the tears, I knew I couldn't back down. If I gave in now, everything would go back to the way it was. The children would learn that tears and manipulation could solve any problem. Claire would learn that she could take me for granted indefinitely as long as she brought the children into the equation when I resisted. Mark would learn that someone would always be there to bail him out when his choices had consequences. and I would learn that I was valued only for what I could provide, not for who I was. The next morning, I called Margaret at the bank again. "I want to set up college funds for my grandchildren," I said. "Separate accounts that their parents can't access, funds that will be available when the children turn 18. "That's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Sanders. How much would you like to contribute initially?" I thought about the money that had been accumulating in my account since I stopped the monthly transfers, money that would have been spent on a lifestyle my family couldn't afford. "Let's start with $50,000 for each child and set up automatic monthly contributions of $500 per child." "That's very generous. The children will have substantial college funds by the time they graduate high school." "That's the point. I want them to know that I love them and I'm thinking about their future, but I want them to understand that this money comes with expectations. They need to earn it through good grades, good choices, and good relationships." "Would you like me to set up any restrictions on the accounts?" "Yes. The money can only be used for education or for purchasing a first home. And the children can only access it if they maintain a relationship with me that doesn't depend on money." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "How would that last condition be enforced?" "I'll be the one who decides when they've met that condition. If they want the money, they'll have to prove to me that they value me as a person, not just as a financial resource." "I understand. This is quite a thoughtful approach, Mrs. Sanders." "I hope so, Margaret. I really hope so." As I drove home from the bank, I felt a sense of purpose that I hadn't experienced in months. I was still committed to not enabling my family's irresponsible financial behavior, but I was also ensuring that my grandchildren would have opportunities in the future. The difference was that those opportunities would come with strings attached, strings that required them to maintain genuine relationships with me, not just superficial contact motivated by financial need. That evening, I called Claire and told her about the college funds. Her reaction was immediate and predictable. "You'll give them money for college, but you won't help us keep our house?" "That's correct." "That doesn't make any sense, Mom." "It makes perfect sense. The college money is an investment in their future, and it comes with expectations about their relationship with me. The house money was enabling your family to live beyond your means while taking me for granted. But they're just children. They can't control how we've treated you." "No, they can't. But they can control how they treat me going forward. If they want access to that money when they're adults, they'll have to prove that they value me as a person, not just as a source of funds." "And if we lose the house? If we have to move to a neighborhood with worse schools? If their educational opportunities are damaged because of our financial situation? Then you'll work harder to provide for them within your actual means. You'll apply for financial aid, you'll research scholarship opportunities, you'll make the same choices that millions of other families make every day. I can't believe you're willing to gamble with their futures like this." "I'm not gambling with their futures, Claire. I'm ensuring their futures while teaching them important lessons about money, relationships, and personal responsibility. You're the one who gambled with their futures by building a lifestyle on someone else's money." The conversation continued in circles, as they all did now, with Claire unable to understand my perspective, and me unable to make her see that her resistance proved my point. If she truly valued me as a person, she would be more concerned about repairing our relationship than about getting access to my money. But as the weeks passed and the crisis deepened, I began to see small signs of change. Claire started calling me more often, and some of those calls weren't about money. She asked about my health, my activities, my feelings about the situation. Mark stopped by once to apologize for the way they had treated me, and while his visit was clearly motivated by their financial crisis, his apology seemed genuine. Even Emma called a second time, and while she was still angry about their situation, she also asked about my life, my past, and my perspective on what was happening. She was beginning to understand that there were two sides to every story, and that adults made complicated decisions for complicated reasons. The children were adapting better than I had expected. Sophie was excited about the prospect of sharing a room with Emma, seeing it as an adventure rather than a hardship. Jake had made friends with some boys in their new neighborhood and was already talking about joining a community soccer league. Even Emma, who had been the most resistant to change, was beginning to see some positives in their new situation. But Claire and Mark were struggling. The stress of losing their house, downsizing their lifestyle, and adjusting to their actual income was taking a toll on their marriage, their health, and their stability. Several times I found myself reaching for the phone to call and offer help, to make it all stop, to return to the comfortable dysfunction of our previous relationship. Each time, I reminded myself why I had made this choice in the first place. I thought about standing in that parking lot on Thanksgiving night, watching their car disappear into the darkness. I thought about years of being treated like a financial institution rather than a family member. I thought about the difference between being needed and being valued. And each time, I hung up the phone and waited to see what would happen next. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in March, 6 months after I had severed the financial lifeline that had kept my daughter's family afloat for so many years. I was tending to my small indoor herb garden when the phone rang with an urgency that seemed to vibrate through the walls of my quiet house. "Mrs. Sanders, this is Dr. Patricia Whitman from Children's Hospital. I'm calling about your granddaughter, Sophie Thompson." My heart stopped. The small watering can in my hand clattered to the floor, spilling water across my kitchen tiles as images of my youngest grandchild flashed through my mind. Sophie with her bright smile and endless questions. Sophie who still believed in magic and fairy tales. Sophie who called me every few weeks just to tell me about her day. What's happened to her? She was brought in this morning with severe abdominal pain. We've run some tests and we need to perform emergency surgery. She has acute appendicitis, and there are signs of complications that require immediate intervention. My legs gave out, and I sank into the nearest chair. Is she going to be okay? We have every reason to expect a full recovery, but we need to operate within the next few hours. The issue is that your daughter's insurance has lapsed, and the family doesn't have the financial resources to cover the surgery. The hospital's financial counselor has been trying to work with them, but the words hit me like physical blows. While I had been teaching my family lessons about financial responsibility and personal accountability, my granddaughter had been walking around with a ticking time bomb in her abdomen, and when it finally exploded, her parents couldn't afford to save her life. "How much?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "The surgery and recovery will likely cost between $40,000 and $60,000, depending on complications. Without insurance, the family would need to either pay a substantial portion up front or qualify for the hospital's hardship program, which could take days to process. And Sophie doesn't have days. No, ma'am, she doesn't." I closed my eyes and felt the weight of every choice I had made over the past 6 months. In my determination to teach my family about financial responsibility, I had created a situation where my 8-year-old granddaughter's life was at risk because her parents couldn't afford medical care. "Dr. Whitman, please proceed with the surgery immediately. I'll be there within the hour to handle the financial arrangements." "Thank you, Mrs. Sanders. We'll take excellent care of Sophie." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, staring at the spilled water from my overturned watering can. The herbs I had been nurturing so carefully seemed suddenly insignificant in the face of this crisis. Everything I had been holding on to, my principles, my hurt feelings, my determination to teach hard lessons, felt petty and small compared to Sophie's need. The drive to the hospital was a blur of guilt and self-recrimination. I had been so focused on my own wounded pride that I had failed to consider all the possible consequences of my actions. Claire and Mark had let their health insurance lapse, probably because they couldn't afford the premiums without my financial support. They had been making impossible choices between basic necessities, and in their desperation to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, they had gambled with their children's safety. I found Claire in the pediatric surgery waiting room, hunched over in a plastic chair with her face buried in her hands. Mark was pacing nearby, his phone pressed to his ear as he spoke in urgent, hushed tones to someone who was clearly unable to help. When Claire looked up and saw me, her face crumpled with relief and something that looked like shame. "Mom, thank God you're here." I sat down beside her and took her trembling hands in mine. "How is she?" "They took her into surgery 20 minutes ago. The doctor said her appendix was close to rupturing, and there might be some infection already. They won't know the full extent until they open her up." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She had lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant worry. Her clothes were wrinkled and mismatched, as if she had thrown them on in a panic. This wasn't the composed, sometimes cold woman who had been calling me to argue about money. This was a terrified mother facing the possibility of losing her child. "Claire, I'm so sorry." She looked at me with confusion. "Sorry for what?" "For putting you in this position. For letting my hurt feelings create a situation where Sophie's health was at risk. Mom, this isn't your fault. We should have found a way to keep the insurance. We should have—" "No," I interrupted. "This is my fault. I was so determined to teach you a lesson that I forgot what really matters." Mark finished his phone call and joined us, his face gray with exhaustion and fear. "The insurance company says there's a 30-day waiting period to reinstate our policy. Even if we pay everything we owe, Sophie won't be covered for this surgery." "That's not a problem," I said quietly. "I've already spoken to the financial counselor. Everything is taken care of." Mark stared at me. "Karen, we can't let you—" "Yes, you can. This is my granddaughter, and she needs surgery, and I have the money to pay for it. Everything else can wait." For the next 4 hours, we sat in that waiting room together, barely speaking but united in our fear for Sophie. I watched Claire and Mark support each other through the crisis, saw the genuine love and partnership that existed between them despite the financial stress that had been tearing them apart. I observed the way they comforted Jake and Emma, who had been brought to the hospital by Mark's sister when the emergency began. During those long hours, I began to understand something that had eluded me during the previous 6 months of conflict. My family's financial dependence on me hadn't been a deliberate manipulation or a calculated taking advantage of my generosity. It had been the natural result of my own choices, my own need to feel needed, my own way of expressing love through financial support. Claire had grown up watching me solve problems with money. When her father died and left us with unexpected expenses, I had handled them financially. When she needed help with college costs, I had provided the funds. When she and Mark wanted to buy their first house, I had given them the down payment. At every major juncture in her adult life, I had stepped in with financial solutions. I had trained my daughter to depend on me financially, and then I had punished her for that dependence when it came at the cost of the emotional intimacy I craved. I had created the very dynamic that I later found so hurtful, and then I had destroyed it in a way that put my grandchildren at risk. Dr. Whitman emerged from the surgical suite just after 6 p.m., still wearing her scrubs, but with a smile on her face that told us everything we needed to know before she spoke. "Sophie is going to be fine. We were able to remove her appendix before it ruptured, and while there was some inflammation in the surrounding tissue, we cleaned that up without any complications. She'll need to stay in the hospital for a few days for observation and antibiotics, but she should make a complete recovery." The relief in that waiting room was palpable. Claire burst into tears. Mark sagged against the wall as if his legs could no longer support him, and Jake and Emma hugged each other with the fierce desperation of children who had been afraid they might lose their little sister. When can we see her? Claire asked through her tears. She's in recovery now, but she should be awake and alert within the hour. You can see her 2 at a time once she's settled in her room. As Dr. Whitman walked away, Claire turned to me, with tears streaming down her face. Mom, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Claire. I should have been here all along. No, you shouldn't have. You were right about everything. We were taking you for granted, we were living beyond our means, and we were treating you like a bank instead of a person. This whole crisis could have been avoided if we had been more responsible. I looked at my daughter and saw something I hadn't seen in years: genuine remorse and self-reflection. The crisis with Sophie had stripped away all the defensiveness and justification that had characterized our conversations for months. Claire was finally seeing the situation clearly, not just from her own perspective, but from mine as well. We both made mistakes, Claire. I made mine by enabling your financial dependence, and then making mine by cutting you off so abruptly that it put the children at risk. You were trying to teach us something important. I was trying to feel valued. There's a difference. Over the next 3 days, while Sophie recovered in the hospital, something fundamental shifted in our family dynamic. Without the pressure of financial crisis hanging over them, and with the shock of nearly losing Sophie still fresh, everyone seemed to see each other more clearly. Claire started asking me about my life, my feelings, my perspective on things that had nothing to do with money. She told me about her job, her hopes for the future, her fears about being a good mother. We talked about her father, about her childhood, about memories we shared that had nothing to do with financial support. Mark came to me on the 2nd day of Sophie's hospitalization and had the most honest conversation we had ever had. Karen, I need you to know that I never intended for our relationship to become so focused on money. I was grateful for your help, but I also let it become a crutch that kept me from facing some hard truths about my business and our finances. What kind of hard truths? That I was taking on projects that weren't profitable because I knew you were covering our basic expenses. That I was making business decisions based on passion rather than financial reality. That I was letting Claire carry too much of the emotional burden of our family's financial stress. And now? Now I'm learning to run a business that actually supports our family. It's harder, and it means saying no to projects I'd love to do but can't afford to take on. But it's also more honest. I'm building something sustainable rather than just something that looks good on the surface. Even the children seemed different. Emma spent hours sitting with me in Sophie's hospital room, asking questions about my life that she had never shown interest in before. She wanted to know about my childhood, about her grandfather, about what it was like to be young during a different era. Jake brought me drawings he had made and seemed genuinely interested in my reactions to them. Sophie, despite being the patient, was somehow the catalyst for all of this healing. Her brush with serious illness had reminded everyone of what truly mattered, and her natural 8-year-old wisdom seemed to cut through all the adult complications that had been tearing us apart. "Grandma," she said on her 2nd day in the hospital, "I'm glad you came to help me." "Of course I came, sweetheart. I'll always be here when you really need me. But you weren't here before, when we were sad about losing our house." Her observation was direct and painful in the way that only children's honesty can be. "No, I wasn't. I was angry and hurt, and I made some choices that I regret." "Are you still angry?" "No, sweetheart. I'm not angry anymore." "Good. Being angry makes people make bad choices." Out of the mouths of babes. Sophie's simple wisdom highlighted the essential truth that I had lost sight of during my months of righteous indignation. Anger, justified or not, had driven me to make choices that ultimately hurt the people I loved most. When Sophie was released from the hospital, I helped Claire and Mark get her settled in their new apartment. It was smaller than their old house, but it was clean and comfortable, and they had made it into a warm, loving home. The children had adjusted better than anyone had expected, and while they sometimes mentioned missing their old house, they seemed genuinely happy in their new surroundings. "It's kind of nice," Emma admitted as she showed me around. "I like sharing a room with Sophie. She tells me about her dreams in the morning, and I help her with her homework at night. And we're closer to the community center where I play soccer. Now," Jake added, "some of my new friends live in the same complex." Even Sophie seemed content with the changes. "My new room has a window that looks at the playground," she told me proudly. "I can see all the kids playing from my bed." As I looked around their new home, I realized that my family had not only survived the financial crisis I had precipitated, they had learned from it. Claire and Mark were working together more effectively than they had in years. The children were more appreciative of what they had and less focused on what they lacked. Everyone seemed more grounded, more realistic about money, and more focused on the relationships that truly mattered. But the real test came when Claire and I had a private conversation the evening after Sophie came home from the hospital. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." "Of course. I want to ask you to help us again, but not in the way you think." I braced myself, assuming she was going to request a return to the old financial arrangement, albeit with promises of better behavior and more appreciation. "I want you to help us figure out how to have a relationship that doesn't involve money at all. I want you to help me learn how to be a daughter who calls her mother because she misses her, not because she needs something. I want you to help me learn how to include you in our lives because we value your presence, not because we're obligated to." I stared at my daughter, hardly believing what I was hearing. "I've been thinking about everything that's happened over the past 6 months, and I realize that I don't actually know how to have a relationship with you that isn't built around financial support. You started helping us when Mark and I were first married, and it became such a normal part of our lives that I forgot it was a choice you were making, not an obligation you owed us." "Claire, please let me finish. I need to say this. I took you for granted in the worst possible way. I let you become invisible except when I needed something from you. I stopped seeing you as a person with your own needs and feelings and started seeing you as a resource that would always be available." Tears were running down her face now, but she continued. "When you cut off the financial support, I was so panicked about losing our lifestyle that I couldn't see what you were really trying to tell me. I thought you were being cruel and vindictive, but you were actually trying to save our relationship." "I was trying to save myself, Claire. I was drowning in feeling unappreciated and unloved. But you were right to do it. We needed to hit bottom before we could see how far we had fallen. We needed to face reality about our finances, about our lifestyle, about our relationship with you. And now? Now I want to learn how to be your daughter again. Not your financial dependent, not someone who calls you only when I need help, but your daughter who loves you and wants you in her life because you matter to me as a person." I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. "Claire, that's all I ever wanted. I know that now. But I need your help to figure out how to make it happen. I need you to teach me how to call you just to talk. I need you to show me how to include you in our lives in ways that have nothing to do with money. I need you to help me become the daughter you deserve." The conversation that followed was the most honest and productive we had ever had. We talked about boundaries, about expectations, about the difference between helping and enabling. We discussed ways to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Claire asked me to give her time to prove that she could value me for who I was rather than what I could provide. She asked me not to offer financial help, even if I saw them struggling, until she had demonstrated that she could maintain a loving relationship with me without any expectation of monetary support. "I want to earn back your trust," she said. "I want to prove to you and to myself that I can be a good daughter without being a financial burden." And what about the children? What about their needs? We'll figure it out. We'll apply for assistance programs, we'll look into scholarships, we'll make the same choices that other families in our situation make. We'll learn to live within our means and appreciate what we have. And if there's a real emergency, another medical crisis, then we'll deal with it the way other families do. We'll work with the hospital, we'll apply for aid, we'll find a way. But we won't automatically assume that you'll bail us out. I looked at my daughter and saw a strength and determination that I hadn't seen since she was a young woman just starting her career. The financial crisis had stripped away the comfortable illusions that my support had made possible, but it had also revealed the capable, resilient person that Claire had always been underneath. "There's something else," Claire said. "I want to pay you back." "Claire, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is. Maybe not all at once and maybe not quickly, but I want to pay you back every penny you spent supporting our family over the years. I want to do it because I need to understand the true cost of what you gave us, and I need to demonstrate that I take that gift seriously. That could take years, decades even. Then it will take years, but I'll feel better knowing that your help was a loan rather than a handout, and that I'm taking responsibility for the choices we made." I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the maturity and insight that Claire was demonstrating. This was the daughter I had raised, the strong, principled woman who had somehow gotten lost in the comfortable trap of financial dependency. What about Mark? What about the children? How do they feel about this plan? Mark is completely on board. He says it's the first time in years that he's felt like he's truly providing for his family. And the children are learning lessons that they probably should have learned a long time ago. Emma got a part-time job to help with her own expenses. Jake is doing odd jobs around the neighborhood to earn money for his soccer fees. Even Sophie is learning to take better care of her toys and clothes because she understands that they cost money we don't have to waste. And you? How are you feeling about all of this? Claire smiled through her tears. Scared, proud, hopeful, ashamed of how I treated you, grateful for the lessons you forced us to learn. It's complicated. Most important things are complicated. Mom, will you help us? Will you help us figure out how to be a family that doesn't revolve around money? I looked at my daughter and saw not the desperate woman who had been calling me for months begging for financial assistance, but the thoughtful, determined person who was ready to do the hard work of rebuilding our relationship on a healthier foundation. Yes, Claire, I'll help you. But I need something from you too. Anything. I need you to be patient with me while I learn how to stop trying to solve problems with money. I need you to help me find other ways to show love and support that don't involve my checkbook. I need you to teach me how to be your mother without being your bank. Deal. We hugged then, and it felt different from any embrace we had shared in years. It wasn't the quick, obligatory hug of a daughter grateful for financial help, or the desperate hug of someone trying to manipulate a response. It was the real, honest hug of two people who loved each other and were committed to figuring out how to show that love in healthy ways. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, I had stood in a restaurant parking lot feeling forgotten and unvalued. I had responded to that pain by withholding the one thing that I thought made me important to my family, my money. The consequences had been more severe than I had anticipated. My family had lost their house, their financial security, and nearly lost Sophie to a medical emergency they couldn't afford to address. But they had also gained something valuable: self-respect, resilience, and a clearer understanding of what really mattered in their relationships. I had gained something too. I had learned the difference between being needed and being valued, between helping and enabling, between love that costs something and love that costs everything. I had discovered that my worth as a person wasn't measured by my ability to solve other people's problems with money, and that real relationships required mutual investment of time, attention, and emotional energy. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Claire and Mark would continue to struggle financially as they learned to live within their means. The children would have to adjust to a lifestyle that included fewer privileges and more responsibilities. I would have to resist the urge to step in with financial solutions every time I saw them facing difficulties. But for the first time in years, I felt hopeful about our future as a family. We were building something real, something honest, something that could withstand the test of time and circumstances. We were learning to love each other for who we were rather than what we could provide. And that, I realized, was worth more than all the money I had ever given them. 3 weeks after Sophie's surgery, I was organizing my late husband's old papers when I found something that changed everything I thought I knew about that Thanksgiving night. Hidden in a folder of insurance documents was a receipt that made my blood run cold and my hands shake with a mixture of rage and devastating understanding. It was a receipt from Giovanni's restaurant, dated the day after Thanksgiving, for a private ambulance service. The bill was addressed to Mark Thompson, my son-in-law, and it detailed emergency medical transport from the restaurant parking lot to Mercy General Hospital at 8:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I stared at the paper for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. An ambulance had been called to Giovanni's restaurant on Thanksgiving night, just minutes after I had watched my family drive away and leave me standing alone in the parking lot. Someone in my family had needed emergency medical care, and I had been completely unaware of it. My hands trembling, I reached for my phone and called the hospital's records department. After explaining who I was and providing the necessary verification, I was connected to a supervisor who could access patient information for family members. Mrs. Sanders, I can confirm that we treated Mark Thompson on November 28th for what appears to have been a cardiac event. He was brought in by ambulance and kept overnight for observation. The preliminary diagnosis was severe anxiety attack with cardiac symptoms, but all tests came back normal. A cardiac event? On Thanksgiving night? Yes, ma'am. He was released the following morning with instructions to follow up with his primary care physician and to avoid stress. I hung up the phone and sat in my husband's old study, surrounded by decades of carefully filed documents, feeling like the ground had shifted beneath my feet. Mark had suffered what appeared to be a heart attack in the parking lot of Giovanni's restaurant on Thanksgiving night. While I had been standing there feeling abandoned and forgotten, my son-in-law had been fighting for his life just yards away from me. The sequence of events began to make horrible sense. Claire's distracted behavior during dinner, her frequent phone checks, the way the children had seemed restless and anxious. Mark's obvious tension, his preoccupied demeanor, the way he had kept touching his chest during the meal. The family's hurried departure that I had interpreted as thoughtless abandonment. I called Claire immediately, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" "Claire, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Of course. What is it?" "On Thanksgiving night, when you left the restaurant, what really happened?" There was a long pause, and I could hear Claire's breathing change. "What do you mean?" "I found a receipt for an ambulance service. Mark was taken to the hospital that night, wasn't he?" The silence stretched so long that I thought the call had been dropped. Finally, Claire spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "How did you find out?" "That doesn't matter. What matters is that you tell me what really happened that night." "Mom, I can't. I don't know how to." "I'll start from the beginning, Claire. Tell me everything." I heard her take a shaky breath. Mark had been feeling chest pains all day. He said it was just stress from work, but they were getting worse during dinner. He didn't want to ruin Thanksgiving, so he kept trying to ignore them. My heart sank as the picture became clearer. "Go on." "When we got to the parking lot, he collapsed. Just fell down right next to the car, clutching his chest and gasping for air. I thought he was having a heart attack. I thought he was dying." "And you called 911? "Yes." Emma was screaming, Jake was crying. Sophie was asking what was wrong with Daddy. It was chaos. The ambulance got there in about 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. But you didn't call me. You didn't tell me what was happening. Mom, I'm so sorry. I know how terrible this sounds, but I honestly forgot you were there. Mark was unconscious. The paramedics were working on him. The kids were hysterical. I was following the ambulance to the hospital, and I just forgot everything else existed. The words hit me like physical blows. My daughter hadn't deliberately abandoned me. She hadn't driven away because she didn't care about me or because she took me for granted. She had driven away because her husband was potentially dying, and in that moment of crisis, nothing else in the world had mattered to her. Why didn't you tell me later? Why didn't you call me from the hospital? Because I was ashamed. I was so ashamed, Mom. When I realized the next morning that we had left you at the restaurant, I was horrified. But then Mark's doctor said he needed to avoid stress, and I thought that telling you about his health scare would just make everything worse. So you let me believe that you had simply forgotten about me. I thought it would be easier than explaining that I had forgotten about you because my husband almost died. I thought you would be more hurt knowing that I had completely lost track of your existence in a moment of crisis. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of 7 months of misunderstanding settle on my shoulders like a heavy blanket. All of this pain, all of this conflict, all of the financial devastation I had caused had been built on a foundation of miscommunication and shame. Claire, is Mark okay now? Yes, he's fine. It turned out to be a severe panic attack brought on by financial stress. The doctor said his symptoms were so intense that they mimicked a heart attack. He's been on medication for anxiety ever since, and he's been seeing a therapist. Financial stress that I made worse by cutting off your support. Mom, don't do this to yourself. The stress was already there. That's why he had the attack. In the first place, you didn't cause his anxiety. Our financial irresponsibility did. But I was already doing the math in my head, calculating the timeline and the consequences. Mark's panic attack had been triggered by financial stress. When I withdrew my financial support, I had increased that stress exponentially. His business had suffered because his anxiety had worsened. Their family had spiraled into crisis, partly because I had punished them for something that wasn't their fault. Why didn't you tell me any of this when I started cutting off the money? Why didn't you explain what had really happened? Because I was a coward. Because I was ashamed that I had forgotten about you, even if it was for understandable reasons. Because I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would blame yourself for Mark's health problems. Because I thought I could handle the financial crisis without dragging you into our medical drama. And instead, you let me think that you had abandoned me deliberately. Yes, and I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorrier than I know how to express. I sat in my husband's study, holding the phone and staring at the receipt that had changed everything. 7 months of anger and hurt and financial warfare, all based on a misunderstanding that had grown larger and more destructive with each passing day. Claire, I need to see Mark. I need to talk to him. Mom, he feels terrible about all of this. He's been wanting to tell you the truth for months, but I asked him not to. I was afraid of how you would react. How I would react to learning that my son-in-law almost died and I didn't know about it. How I would react to discovering that I had been punishing my family for a medical emergency. I was afraid you would blame yourself. I was afraid you would do exactly what you're doing right now. She was right, of course. I was already drowning in guilt and self-recrimination. Every harsh word I had spoken, every financial support I had withdrawn, every moment of righteous indignation I had felt over the past 7 months now seemed cruel and misguided. An hour later, I was sitting in Claire's small apartment living room, facing Mark for the first time since learning the truth about Thanksgiving night. He looked older than I remembered, more fragile, and there was a wariness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Karen, I owe you an enormous apology." "No, Mark, I owe you one. I had no idea about your health crisis, and I made everything worse by cutting off our financial support when you were already struggling." "You couldn't have known. Claire and I decided not to tell you, and that was our mistake." "But why? Why wouldn't you tell me that you had a medical emergency?" Mark looked at Claire, who nodded encouragingly. "Because I was embarrassed. Because the attack was caused by anxiety about money, and I was ashamed that I had let financial stress affect my health so severely. Because I felt like a failure as a husband and father. And because," Claire added quietly, "we were afraid that if you knew the truth, you would feel obligated to help us even more, and we knew we were already too dependent on your support." I stared at them both, trying to understand the twisted logic that had led to so much pain and misunderstanding. "So you let me believe that you had simply forgotten about me, rather than telling me that you were dealing with a medical crisis." "We thought it would be better for everyone," Mark said. "We thought we could handle the financial pressure on our own, and we thought you would be happier not knowing about my health problems. Instead, I spent 7 months thinking that my family didn't care about me. And we spent 7 months dealing with the consequences of financial decisions we had made while depending on your support," Claire said. "In a way, maybe it all worked out the way it needed to." "How can you say that? You lost your house, your financial security, your peace of mind. Sophie almost died because you couldn't afford proper medical care." "But we also learned to live within our means," Mark said quietly. "We learned to depend on each other instead of depending on your money. We learned that our family was strong enough to survive crisis and change." "And I learned," Claire added, "that I had been taking you for granted in ways I didn't even realize. I learned that our relationship needed to be based on more than financial support." I looked around their small apartment, at the children's artwork on the walls, and the family photos arranged carefully on the bookshelf. It was modest but warm, and there was a sense of peace in the space that hadn't existed in their previous, larger home. "Do you really believe that all of this suffering was worth it?" "I believe," Claire said carefully, "that we're a stronger family now than we were before. I believe that our relationship is more honest than it's been in years. I believe that the children have learned important lessons about money and resilience that they might not have learned otherwise. And I believe," Mark added, "that I'm a better man now than I was when I was depending on someone else to support my family. My business is smaller but more sustainable. My marriage is stronger because Claire and I had to work together to survive the crisis. My relationship with my children is closer because we've all learned not to take our security for granted." "But what about the deception? What about letting me suffer for months thinking that you had abandoned me?" "That was wrong," Claire said firmly. "That was absolutely wrong, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. I should have told you the truth immediately, regardless of the consequences." "We were trying to protect everyone," Mark said, "but we ended up hurting everyone instead." "The road to hell," I murmured. "Is paved with good intentions," Claire finished. "Yes." I sat back in their couch and felt the full weight of the revelation settling over me. Everything I had believed about that Thanksgiving night was wrong. Everything I had done in response was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. My family hadn't abandoned me. They had been dealing with a life-threatening emergency that had overwhelmed their ability to think about anything else. But the consequences of my actions had been real. The pain they had suffered, the lessons they had learned, the changes they had made. All of it had happened because of choices I had made based on incorrect information. "What do we do now?" I asked. "We move forward," Claire said. "We build a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. We don't pretend that the past 7 months didn't happen, but we also don't let them define our future. But how can I forgive myself for what I put you through?" The same way we forgive ourselves for deceiving you, Mark said. By accepting that people make mistakes, that families survive imperfect choices, and that love is stronger than misunderstanding. Over the next several hours, we talked through everything that had happened since that Thanksgiving night. Claire and Mark explained the financial struggles they had faced, the difficult choices they had made, and the ways they had grown stronger as individuals and as a couple. I shared my own journey of hurt and anger and eventual understanding. The children joined us for dinner, and I watched as they interacted with their parents and with each other. There was a closeness and cooperation that I hadn't seen before, a sense of mutual support that had grown out of their shared struggles. "Grandma," Sophie said as we were cleaning up after dinner, "are you going to help us again?" "What kind of help do you mean, sweetheart?" "Money help. Are you going to pay for our stuff again?" I looked at Claire and Mark, who were watching this conversation with interest, but not interference. "What do you think, Sophie? Should I help your family with money?" Sophie considered this question with the seriousness that 8-year-olds bring to important matters. "I think you should help us when we really, really need it, like when I was sick. But I don't think you should pay for regular stuff, because then Mommy and Daddy don't learn how to take care of us by themselves." "That's very wise, sweetheart." Emma says that families should help each other, but they shouldn't do everything for each other because then people don't learn how to be strong. I looked across the room at my 15-year-old granddaughter, who was pretending to be absorbed in her homework, but was clearly listening to our conversation. Emma's right about that. "So maybe you could help us sometimes, but not all the time?" Maybe that's exactly right. Later that evening, as I was preparing to leave, Claire walked me to my car. "Mom, I have something else I need to tell you." "More revelations?" "Not exactly. It's about the money you've been setting aside for the children's college funds." "What about it?" "I want you to know that we're going to work to contribute to those funds too. Not much at first, but something every month. I want the children to know that their education is a priority for all of us, not just for you." "Claire, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I need to demonstrate to my children that their parents are capable of planning for their future, even if we can't do it on the same scale that you can. I need them to see that we take responsibility for their welfare. And if you can't afford to contribute some months, then we'll explain that to the children, and they'll understand that families sometimes have financial constraints. But they'll also see that we try, that we prioritize their future, that we don't just assume someone else will handle it." I hugged my daughter goodbye, and it felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. We had been through a crucible of misunderstanding and pain, but we had emerged with a deeper understanding of each other and a stronger foundation for our relationship. As I drove home, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us to this point. A medical emergency that I had misinterpreted as abandonment had led to months of financial warfare that had ultimately strengthened my family in ways that continued support might never have achieved. The children had learned resilience and resourcefulness. Claire and Mark had learned to depend on each other and to live within their means. I had learned the difference between being needed and being valued, and my family had learned to value me for who I was rather than what I could provide. None of it had been planned. None of it had been pleasant. But all of it had been necessary. The next morning, I called Margaret at the bank to discuss modifying our previous arrangements. "Mrs. Sanders, I'm pleased to hear that things are improving with your family." "They are, Margaret, but I want to set up a different kind of support system. Instead of automatic monthly transfers, I want to establish an emergency fund that can only be accessed for genuine crises, medical emergencies, job loss, natural disasters, that kind of thing." "That sounds very reasonable. How would you like to structure the access to these funds?" "I want it to require approval from both me and an independent financial counselor. I want my family to have security in case of real emergencies, but I also want them to continue learning to live within their means for day-to-day expenses. That's an excellent approach, Mrs. Sanders. It provides safety without encouraging dependency. As I finalized the new arrangements, I thought about the lessons that all of us had learned over the past 7 months. Money, I had discovered, was a tool that could build relationships or destroy them, depending on how it was used. Love expressed only through financial support was hollow and ultimately unsustainable. But love that included appropriate financial boundaries and mutual respect could create the foundation for genuine intimacy and connection. My family would continue to face challenges. Claire and Mark would struggle at times to make ends meet on their actual income. The children would have to learn to live with less than some of their peers. I would have to resist the urge to solve every problem with money. But we would face those challenges together, as a family that valued each other for who we were rather than what we could provide. We would build relationships based on love and respect rather than financial dependency. We would support each other in ways that made us all stronger rather than ways that made us all weaker. That Thanksgiving night had been the beginning of the end of one kind of family relationship. But it had also been the beginning of something better. A family bound together by choice rather than obligation, by love rather than money, by mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Sometimes the worst misunderstandings lead to the best outcomes. Sometimes the most painful lessons are the most valuable ones. Sometimes families have to fall apart before they can truly come together. And sometimes, the greatest gift we can give the people we love is the opportunity to discover their own strength. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.